Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Conversation 1. You will hear a conversation. A female student visits the Student Services Housing Office to speak with a housing coordinator about her room assignment for the upcoming fall semester. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions. Excuse me, I was told this is where I can talk to someone about my housing assignment for next fall?
That's right. I'm Marcus Thompson, Housing Coordinator. How can I help you today?
Hi, Mr. Thompson. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a sophomore, and I just got my room assignment for next fall semester, and I'm a little concerned about it.
What seems to be the problem?
I was assigned to Hillcrest Hall, but that's all the way on the north side of campus. Most of my classes are in the science buildings on the south side. I was hoping to be in one of the residential colleges closer to there, like Meridian Hall or Westbrook.
I see. Did you list your preferences when you submitted your housing application?
I did. I listed Meridian as my first choice and Westbrook as my second. But I ended up at Hillcrest, which wasn't even on my list.
Right. So what happens is, we process assignments based on a combination of seniority and the date your application was submitted. If the halls you requested were already full by the time we got to your application, we place students in the next available space.
Oh. So it's just luck of the draw, basically?
To some extent, yes. But there are options. You can be placed on a waitlist for Meridian or Westbrook. If a spot opens up, you'd be contacted and given 48 hours to accept or decline.
How long is the wait list? I mean, is it realistic to expect a spot?
It varies year to year. For Meridian, the waitlist currently has about 30 students ahead of you. Westbrook is a bit shorter, around 15. Some spots do open up over the summer as students change their plans, study abroad, or withdraw. I'd say maybe 40% of students on the Westbrook waitlist do get a room.
That's not terrible. Can I be on both waitlists at the same time?
You can, and I'd actually recommend it. You just need to fill out a waitlist request form. I can give you one right now, and indicate both halls. If you're offered a room in either one, you'd need to decide within 48 hours.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Is there also any kind of appeal process I should know about?
There is, but the appeals process is generally reserved for students with documented medical needs or ADA accommodations. If you have a medical condition that's affected by distance, say, a mobility issue, you could submit documentation from a healthcare provider and we'd review your case on a priority basis.
I don't have any medical issues. I just really prefer not to walk 20 minutes to class every day.
I understand. In that case, the waitlist is your best option. Also, you might want to check the Student Housing Exchange Board. That's an online portal where students who've already been assigned rooms can post swap requests. It's possible someone in Meridian or Westbrook would want to switch to Hillcrest.
I didn't know about that. How do I access it?
It's on the housing portal, same place you submitted your application. Just click on Room Exchange. Any swaps still need to be approved by our office, but if both students agree, we usually authorize it without any problem.
Great. So to summarize, I fill out the waitlist form for both halls and also check the room exchange board?
Exactly. And don't forget, the deadline to make any changes through official channels is August 1st. After that, assignments are locked in for the fall semester.
August 1st, got it. Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson.
No problem at all. Here's the waitlist form. Good luck.
That is the end of the conversation 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Conversation 2. You will hear a conversation. A male student visits the registrar's office to speak with a staff member about a registration error preventing him from enrolling in an upper-level environmental studies course. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Hi, I need some help with my course registration for the fall semester. The system keeps giving me an error and I can't get into the class I need.
Of course, I'm happy to help. I'm Sandra Rivera. What course are you trying to register for?
It's Environmental Studies 340. Every time I try to add it, I get a message saying I don't meet the prerequisites.
Let me pull up your record. Can I get your student ID?
Sure, it's 884-7293.
Okay, so I see you're a junior and an environmental studies major. ENVS 340, that's environmental policy and law, correct?
Yes, that's the one.
The prerequisites listed for that course are ENVS 200 and either POLS 101 or POLS 102. I can see you completed ENVS 200 with a B+ last semester, great. But I'm not seeing any political science courses on your record here.
Oh, I actually took Government 110 at Greenfield Community College before I transferred here. That should be equivalent to POLS 101, shouldn't it?
It might be, but we'd need to verify that. Transfer credit evaluations are handled by the Office of Academic Affairs, not by us here in the registrar's office. Did you have your transfer credits officially evaluated when you enrolled here?
I thought I did, but maybe Government 110 wasn't included. I only requested evaluations for my English and math courses at the time.
That's likely the issue. What you'd need to do is contact the Office of Academic Affairs and request an official course equivalency evaluation for Government 110. You'd need to submit a course syllabus or the catalog description from Greenfield Community College.
How long does that evaluation usually take?
Typically between 1 and 3 weeks. Given that fall registration is already open and ENVS 340 could fill up, I'd strongly suggest contacting them as soon as possible, ideally today or tomorrow.
Is there any way I can register provisionally right now and get the prerequisite issue sorted out afterward? I'd hate to lose my spot in the class.
There is a process for that. You can request a prerequisite override, which would allow you to register on a provisional basis. However, that has to be approved by the course instructor or the department chair, not by us here. You'd need to email the Environmental Studies department directly and explain your situation.
So I'd contact the department and explain that I took an equivalent course at my community college?
Exactly. Include any documentation you have, your Greenfield transcript, the course catalog description for Government 110. Instructors are often willing to grant overrides in cases like yours, especially when there's a legitimate equivalent course involved.
And if the department approves it, what happens next?
They would send us a written authorization, usually an email, and we'd manually enroll you in the course. It typically takes about 1 business day after we receive that approval.
Okay. Is there a deadline I should be aware of for getting all of this resolved?
The official last day to add a course for the fall semester is September 5th. That's the add/drop deadline. So you do have some time, but given the evaluation timeline and the possibility of the class filling up, I wouldn't wait.
Right. I'll email the department today and go to academic affairs first thing tomorrow. Actually, one more thing, I also want to drop ENVS 210. Can I do that here?
You can drop it directly through the student portal. Just log into your account, go to your course schedule, and select the drop option. As long as you're within the add/drop period, it's a straightforward process, no need to come into the office for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for walking me through all of this.
Of course. Good luck getting that override approved, it sounds like you have a strong case. That is the end of the conversation too. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 1. You will hear part of a lecture about sociology. Social conformity studies. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to explore one of the most compelling topics in social psychology, social conformity. Conformity, at its core, refers to the process by which individuals adjust their attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to match those of a group. What makes this phenomenon so fascinating is that people often conform even when they privately disagree with the group's position. Let's start with one of the most landmark studies in this field, Solomon Asch's line experiment, conducted in the early 1950s. In Asch's study, participants were shown a standard line and asked to match it to one of 3 comparison lines. Simple enough, right? But here's the twist. The other people in the room were Confederates, actors who intentionally gave the wrong answer. And remarkably, about 75% of participants conformed to the incorrect group answer at least once during the experiment.
Student, Professor Hartwell, I'm a little confused. Why would people give an answer they knew was wrong just because others did? Was it because they actually started to believe the wrong answer, or were they just afraid of standing out?
That's an excellent question, and it gets right to the heart of the distinction between 2 types of conformity, informational and normative. Informational conformity happens when a person genuinely changes their belief because they trust the group's judgment. They think, maybe I'm wrong and they're right. Normative conformity, on the other hand, is driven purely by the desire to fit in and avoid social rejection, even when the person privately knows the group is incorrect. Ashe's follow-up interviews suggested that most of his participants were exhibiting normative conformity. They knew the answer was wrong, but the social pressure was simply too strong to resist. Now, let's move on to Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, which pushed the concept of conformity even further into the realm of authority. Milgram found that a staggering 65% of participants were willing to administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to another person, simply because an authority figure, a researcher in a lab coat, instructed them to continue. This raised profound ethical questions about both experimental design and the darker implications of conformity in real-world settings like wartime atrocities. What both Ashe and Milgram demonstrated is that situational factors can override personal moral judgment to a remarkable degree. However, more recent research has nuanced these findings. For example, studies by Moscovici in the 1970s showed that consistent minorities, small groups who hold firm to an alternative view, can actually shift majority opinion over time. This is called minority influence, and it suggests that conformity is not a one-way street. The interplay between majority and minority influence shapes the evolution of social norms in ways that are still being studied today.
That is the end of the lecture 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 2. You will hear part of a lecture about biology. Plant adaptation strategies. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Alright, let's get started. Today's lecture is about plant adaptation strategies, the remarkable ways in which plants have evolved to survive and thrive in environments that would seem impossibly hostile to us. Plants are, in many ways, the ultimate survivors. Unlike animals, they cannot move to escape harsh conditions, so instead they have developed an astonishing array of structural, physiological, and biochemical adaptations over millions of years. Let's begin with adaptations to arid environments, deserts, and semi-arid regions. The most iconic example is the cactus. Cacti have evolved succulent stems that store large quantities of water, allowing them to survive extended droughts. Their leaves have been reduced to spines, which minimizes water loss through transpiration while also deterring herbivores. Additionally, many cacti perform a specialized type of photosynthesis called CAM, crassulation acid metabolism, in which the stomata open only at night to absorb carbon dioxide, greatly reducing water loss compared to plants that open their stomata during the day.
Student, Professor Osei, I've read that some plants in the Arctic also have interesting adaptations. Are those similar to desert adaptations in any way, or are they completely different strategies?
What a perceptive comparison to raise. You'd think the Arctic and the desert are completely opposite environments, but they actually share one critical challenge: water availability. In the Arctic, water is present but often locked in frozen soil, making it physiologically unavailable to plants, a condition called physiological drought. So you do see some overlapping strategies. Arctic plants tend to grow low to the ground in cushion-like forms to avoid wind chill and retain heat, and many have small, waxy leaves to reduce water and heat loss, similar in function to the reduced leaves of desert plants. However, the underlying trigger is different. Desert adaptations respond to heat and aridity, while Arctic adaptations respond to cold and the freeze-thaw cycle. Now let's shift to aquatic adaptations. Plants in aquatic or waterlogged environments face a completely different problem, not a lack of water, but a lack of oxygen at the root level. Mangroves, for example, have developed aerial roots called pneumatophores that project upward out of the mud and water to absorb oxygen directly from the air. Water lilies, on the other hand, have developed extensive internal air channels called aerenchyma that carry oxygen from the leaves and stems down to the roots submerged in oxygen-poor sediment. Finally, I want to highlight carnivorous plants as an extreme example of nutrient adaptation. In nutrient-poor environments, particularly bogs and wetlands with nitrogen-deficient soils, some plants have evolved the ability to trap and digest insects and other small organisms to supplement their nutrient intake. The Venus flytrap uses rapid leaf closure triggered by touch-sensitive hairs, while the sundew uses sticky glandular trichomes to ensnare prey. These adaptations illustrate that when a fundamental resource is scarce, plants can evolve highly specialized and energy-intensive solutions to compensate. Taken together, these diverse strategies reflect the extraordinary plasticity of plant evolution in response to environmental pressures.
That is the end of the lecture 2. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 3. You will hear part of a lecture about economics. Market equilibrium theory. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Good afternoon. Today we're going to dive into one of the foundational concepts of microeconomics, market equilibrium theory. At its most basic, market equilibrium refers to the state in which the quantity of a good or service supplied by producers exactly equals the quantity demanded by consumers at a given price. This price is called the equilibrium price, and the corresponding quantity is called the equilibrium quantity. In a free market, prices naturally gravitate toward this point, driven by the competitive interactions of buyers and sellers. To understand how equilibrium is reached, we need to consider what happens when a market is out of balance. If the current market price is above the equilibrium price, the quantity supplied will exceed the quantity demanded. This is called a surplus. Producers are making more than consumers want to buy at that price. In response, they reduce prices to move inventory, and this price reduction continues until the surplus disappears and equilibrium is restored. Conversely, if the price is below equilibrium, demand exceeds supply, a shortage, and competition among buyers bids the price back up toward equilibrium.
Student, Professor Vance, that makes sense for a simple market. But what happens when something outside the market changes, like a new technology that makes production cheaper? Does that shift the whole equilibrium, or does the price just temporarily drop and then bounce back?
Excellent question, and this is where we introduce the concept of shifts in supply and demand curves, as opposed to movements along those curves. When production costs fall due to new technology, the supply curve itself shifts to the right, meaning producers are willing to supply more at every price level. This creates a new equilibrium, the equilibrium price falls and the equilibrium quantity rises. The market doesn't bounce back to the old equilibrium, it establishes a new one. Similarly, if consumer incomes rise and demand increases, the demand curve shifts right, pushing both the equilibrium price and quantity upward. These external factors, input costs, technology, consumer income, tastes, and prices of related goods, are what economists call the determinants of supply and demand. Now, markets don't always reach equilibrium smoothly, and this is where price controls become relevant. Governments sometimes intervene by setting a price ceiling, a maximum legal price below the equilibrium price, or a price floor, a minimum price above it. A classic example of a price ceiling is rent control. If the government caps rent below the equilibrium level, the quantity of apartments demanded will exceed the quantity supplied, creating a housing shortage. Price floors work in the opposite direction. Minimum wage laws set a floor above the equilibrium wage, which can lead to a surplus of labor, meaning unemployment, at least in the short run according to standard economic models. It's important to note that real-world markets rarely achieve perfect equilibrium as described in theory. Markets are subject to information asymmetries, transaction costs, externalities, and irrational consumer behavior, all of which can prevent prices from clearing efficiently. Behavioral economists like Richard Thaler have argued that because human decision-making is systematically biased, the idealized equilibrium model needs significant revision to reflect how markets actually work. Nevertheless, equilibrium theory remains an indispensable framework for analyzing price formation, predicting market responses to policy changes, and understanding the fundamental logic of resource allocation in market economies.
That is the end of the lecture 3. You now have some time to answer the questions. That is the end of the TOEFL iBT listening test. You now have some time to review your answers.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!